Hey everyone, it's Flip to Dip, former JMod Flippy. I've been active on Twitter lately talking about the new skill, and I've received some really cool comments which brought up questions in my head that I've been thinking about. I think this is a super interesting area of the game, and I've been interested in the skilling system of RuneScape since I started playing back in 2006. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts and explain some of the topics that I brought up and give my opinion on them. But first of all, I want to make a small disclaimer that I don't think I have a better idea of what the skill should look like and how it should function than anyone currently working at Jagex. This is an incredibly difficult topic because there hasn't been a new skill in the game previously, which makes it really hard to know how to approach it and how to establish processes when, it's the first time. Which sort of brings me a little bit into my first point, I guess. So I saw the Bodhi video, which a lot of people seem to have watched and enjoyed. I think it was also a really good video. I think it made some really good points, and there was also some stuff I didn't agree with. First of all, the deal about making sort of a perfect skill, that the skill we need to release now needs to be perfect, and it's better to spend potentially years designing and developing this skill than to release it in like a timeline of a year. I don't really know what the team is planning in terms of release date, but that's definitely one of my first points which I wanted to bring up. I don't think this skill has to be perfect, nor do I think this should necessarily be the last one. I don't think there should be a decision at this point whether this skill is going to be the final last skill for old school or not. I think that decision should be made on release after seeing how it integrates with the rest of the game. The reason why I think that is because, first of all, putting more time into the skill won't guarantee a better outcome. There is no way of knowing that putting 2 extra years into the skill will make it much better and guarantee an as close to flawless skill as you could have on release. Obviously it does help and it increases the odds, but what I think they need right now is to do it and then see how it turns out. It's a bit of a gamble, but creating a skill will be a gamble no matter what. No matter if they spend 1 year doing it or 3 years doing it, it's just gonna have to be done at some point, and there is no way to guarantee a successful launch of the skill. So what I would do is, in absolutely worst case scenario, let's say we have a bit of a disaster with this skill on launch. So players have been part of the process and all agreed on the concept and all of the details, but then on release, everyone feels like this does not fit the game and this just doesn't work. The game would be better without it. I would remove the skill. I would pull the removal, set maybe a high threshold, and then potentially remove the skill. This is something that Jagex would probably never do, or any other game company for that matter, because most companies, once they put a lot of resources into a project, like they will with this skill, they will just never ever justify removing it. Partly because obviously new content generates revenue over time, and a skill generates revenue for a long time, but also partly because I think it just feels incredibly bad to have put a lot of work into something and then, just throw all that away. It seems like a massive waste of time, even if the game would be better without it. This is something I would like to see more companies do, even if they put a lot of time into something, to be able to put the pride aside and to admit that the game is better without this content, so let's remove it. I think that's just a win for everyone, unless the game, solely relies on this piece of content for revenue and to survive. Now, that aside, as for my thoughts on a new skill in general, I'm definitely for it. I think the game needs more just concrete new content to experience. I think the recent raid we got was fantastic because it's really just that, any new boss or quest or raid, or in this case a skill, in my mind is just an absolute win because it's concrete new content that everyone can try. It's not just a repeated formula in many cases, and it's something that all players can engage with. And especially skills. Skills they hold a very special place in my heart because they engage with so many areas of the game. Skill is not just, the mechanics of training the skill. I think a lot of people, when they think about a skill, they're like, okay, how do I train it? That's like the main question mark in their eyes. If the process of training the skill is fun, that's it. We have a winner of a skill. But in my mind, it's a bit more complex than that, because a winning skill concept is not just the method you use for training it, but it's also how it interacts with the rest of the game. skilling and PVM has a lot of overlap, and then there's account progression and how the skill interacts with how you navigate the world or how you do quests, or the interconnections between other skills, which is probably one of my most important areas of a new skill, because I think something that is so magical about old school is that there are links between skills. Skills affect each other, so there's skills that are dependent on other skills, like woodcutting for fire making. Now obviously we get a lot of logs through PVM, which is a whole complete separate issue, but in general there's a lot of these connections between skills, whether they're dependent on each other or they sort of feed each other, or they're part of a bigger ecosystem, like all the combat skills is together with Slayer and health and etc, etc. So then in my mind, if the training method itself isn't like the one thing that makes or break a skill, then what is it? Well, I posted on Twitter what in my mind are like the most important points to take away when creating a skill. And it's a strong gameplay loop, which is actually like the method you use for training the skill, any repeatable methods, how you handle experience, how that ties into rewards and etc. But then apart from that, we have, as I briefly talked about, how is this skill connected to other skills and how does it fit into the larger ecosystem of other skills. Then when it comes to the rewards of the skill, I think that's also an incredibly important topic. Jagex really needs to take a hard look at the rewards and make sure that they are first and foremost desirable, so that when you can reach a new reward or when you randomly obtain a new reward, it's actually exciting and it's something you're looking forward to, rather than a reward that just fills a small niche in the game or that doesn't really feel like a big upgrade overall. It's a new skill, and with a new skill I would expect some very strong benefit for myself if I train the skill apart from just experience. Now, if that means that there is a slight degree of power creep implemented to the game, I think that's perfectly fine. I think power creep has gotten a very negative tone over the years, and I could make probably a 30 minutes to an hour long video talking about power creep and how there is unhealthy power creep and there is definitely controllable healthy power creep, which old school could really use some of. There's games like World of Warcraft where everything you really care about is whatever is shipped in the new expansion, and 90% of everything they have developed prior to that is completely useless. But old school is nowhere near that, and I don't think it's a slippery slope either. So, but that's a topic for another time. Then I also wrote thematically grounded. This means that I think this skill needs to stay true to the old school vision of, I would say I couldn't find a better word than grounded for it, because that's how I would explain old school to a different person. It's like things you can sort of touch and see and draw inspiration from in real life. We don't have very, very high fantasy magic elements in the game. There are some standard RPG magic elements in the game, but there's no like sci-fi or crazy stuff that is really hard to explain to someone who hasn't played the game. So I think the skill should stay true to that. I don't really know any better way to explain it, but I think something like sailing, even though I'm not the biggest advocate for the skill itself, I think makes a lot of sense thematically in the game, which I also think is one of the reasons why a lot of players are drawn to the concept of that, because it makes sense in the world of old school. Then as my last point, I wrote constant and graspable progression. Now, what I mean about this is in some skills like fire making, for example, really the only thing you care about there is just getting to the next level. There's not really any exciting milestones along the way, and there's no carrot on a stick in front of you, right, pushing you to train the skill apart from experience. And there's also not much else in the game that visualizes when you have reached a milestone. So what most people do is that the vast majority of the time training fire making, they just sit at Wintertodt. They go through the exact same repeatable content over and over again until 99, which to me is one of the big problems with using minigames as the main training method for skills. Temporos was definitely an improvement to Wintertodt because it's more of an alternative training method. That's also a topic for a different day, but in general, I think that skills really benefit from having, different activities, whether that's taking the player to a new place in the world every time they reach a milestone, or they can just access, new stuff over and over again. That to me is like the most basic way of displaying progression to a player. So that I think is incredibly important to get right if you want to launch a strong skill. Then I wrote bonus points for endgame content. I don't think all skills necessarily need to provide endgame content, but if you can pull that off, I think that's obviously a really healthy part for the game. There's not a lot of reasons to train skills past 99 unless you're going for, experience milestones. So if the new skill introduces stuff to do post 99, I think that's just a big win for everyone. So those are probably my top 5 or potentially 6 biggest points of launching a new skill in a successful format. Now, when it comes to actually designing the skill, you could probably go about this in a million different ways, but the process I would definitely not use is scanning through different themes or trying to just sit and brainstorm different themes for the new skill and then try to design gameplay around that. It is a possible way to do it, and I think they could very well release a successful skill through that process, but I also think it is kind of a gamble at the same time. So with skills, as I've also mentioned on Twitter, you have a massive opportunity to try to solve problems in the game. So whether this is, a gap in content, like an area of the game they want to focus in, or if they can create, an interesting dynamic between this new skill and other skills, you can do this. But it's much easier to do this if you do it properly from the very beginning. So I would probably look at, what areas of the game do we think are lacking and what do we want to improve there. And then if you come up with, one or a few problems, you could potentially brainstorm solutions around that. And then you can see if a new skill could actually help you solve some of those problems. We have experience in skills, which is an incredible motivational tool. There's been countless meme posts, saying that, no matter if this skill is shit, you will train it regardless, which is probably true for most players. So that is really the strength of experience as a motivational tool. Now, in a Magic world, you will have a skill that is incredibly fun to train. You get good rewards and experience on top of it. That is like the dream case scenario, right? Where you want to train the skill, just not for the experience, but then you're also getting experience for it. But there are also parts of the game which are less fun to deal with, like what RuneScape 3 did with Invention. No player really enjoys throwing away gold or items, but if you get experience for it, you might be willing to do it to a degree. So you can have a skill that is both fun to train, but also allows for some player sacrifices in some cases. And I think that's just a big win for everyone, because there aren't many things in the game where you can just naturally motivate a player to do it. I can't think of many other ways myself where you could, for example, tell a player to throw away a Bandos chestplate. They would expect something in return, and many times where they expect something in return, it's going to be in the form of a reward, like a different item or something stronger, but then you have gotten one item out of the game, but you're also introducing a new one. But with experience, you could, for example, delete items and just reward players with experience in return. So that's just a concrete example of the power that experience holds, and this does not have to be how do we get rid of gold or items from the game, but it could be any sort of problem that we're facing in the game, where players just generally don't want to do something, but they would perhaps be willing to do it in return for experience and other rewards, of course. That's why I think that this is a brilliant opportunity to try to solve a problem in the game, and I think that should probably be one of the first questions you go through before you start actually designing some of the gameplay. And I guess as a last note of this whole ramble, there was one thing that I tweeted about as well that Boti mentioned in the video, which is sort of leaving content to explore. It's something that I just as a player really, really enjoy, because the situation I don't want to happen is that we vote on every single bit of detail that goes into this new skill, to the point where we have basically played the content before we even get to touch it. I pushed for this so much when we were developing leagues, because I think there is a big element of magic in logging on and experiencing content and sort of figuring out together, and watching streams of people achieving things, or just staying away from spoilers yourself if you want to, but just opportunity that try to get items that no one has collected, and just the social aspect that comes with it, where the players are discussing with each other what the best methods are, and showing some of the new items. Like, there is so much love and magic that goes into exploring content together, rather than everyone already knowing exactly what to do when it's like actually training the skills becomes more of like checking off a to-do list, you know? So that's, I think, maybe a small point to some, but to me is a pretty crucial thing for the launch of this new skill. Now, obviously, Jagex has to pull a lot of aspects of the new skill, but I think you can really do that without revealing the entire soul of the skill and all the content that goes into it. So if we were to pull construction today, for example, you could explain the general process of training construction. So you'll be building furniture and you'll be designing your house yourself. And the rooms that you build will, contain stuff that lets you navigate throughout the world, through teleports and whatnot. You'll be able to repair armor and refresh stats like health and prayer. And you can do that without revealing all the small details, like you will be able to build this piece of furniture at this construction level, and it will do exactly this, this, and this, and this. I, as someone who has worked at Jagex and is now a player of the game, have enough trust in them to actually pull this off. Even if things aren't right on release, where something feels, completely useless or completely overtuned, or parts of the skills are irrelevant, or whatever goes wrong, stuff like that can be fixed in a patch afterwards. Like, to me, it's a completely insane mindset to not let developers of an MMO to tweak things as they go. It's incredibly hard to get things right the first time, and it's not in the best interest of the game to have one shot at a piece of content either. Like, I understand we want to preserve old school as a game, but nerfing and buffing certain methods to create more interesting gameplay in general is not killing the game. Like, yes, there will be people who suffer from stuff like buffs or nerfs, but is that really more important than, the potential millions of other players in the future who will experience the exact same content? Probably not. It's one thing if a game is like World of Warcraft, where you can sort of keep things in a really broken way because you know that next expansion people probably won't care about it. But old school and RuneScape in general are kind of designed to keep most content relevant for, however long we can. So that means that anything that is released should have a very, very long lifespan, ideally. So that means we should definitely allow for some tweaking if that means improving the general experience of our future and current players. That's at least my opinion on that whole discussion, which also touches a lot of other parts of the game. But anyways, that's it for me, I guess. Most important takeaways: there are more important parts when designing a skill than just the actual training method itself. I believe you should design a skill based on its purpose in the game rather than the theme of it, and I really hope they leave some magic for us to explore with the new skill. Those are my main thoughts around the new skill discussions going around. There are so many new skill proposals going around. I haven't really sat down and read them properly, so I don't really have an opinion on, which one is my favorite or what I think should be introduced into the game. As I wrote before as well, I would probably want at least 20 to 40 hours sitting down just designing a concept before coming up with anything, because I think it needs a process of actually sitting down and doing research of other parts of the game before even getting to the core concept of the skill. Anyways, I'm a head off now, so thanks for listening to my ramble, and let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the points I made, and have a nice day.